Hello everyone, my name is Pixlriffs and welcome back to the Minecraft Survival Guide. I hope you guys are having a good day. Today we are back here at the site of our witch farm to make a few more preparations and possibly even start on the mechanism that is going to be powering this entire thing. But doesn't this witch hut look tiny compared to the enormous perimeter we have built around it? Well, today I'm going to show you exactly how small the witch farm is going to be realistically, because we're going to go back to Bounding Box Outline Reloaded and discuss exactly what the area is we can work with when it comes to the witch spawning area and the witch farm mechanism in general. But first of all, I want to take care of a couple of things. For a start, I want to slab the outside of this ring here with red nether brick, because I'm going to be using this as the border for a perimeter that we are, in theory, going to potentially be digging out the entirety of this in future to allow for better spawning rates for the farm and a more technically efficient farm. This is, of course, still a lot of effort to go to, especially for the first-time player, so you might not want to follow this to the letter, but if you want to get the best rates out of your single witch hut, and if you have multiple witch huts, even better, you will probably want to do something along these lines and spawn-proof as much of the area as you can. I'm mainly using red nether brick because I have so much nether rack and so many nether bricks that I decided I would probably put together something that might end up being a color scheme for the area. We might end up decorating things with a pattern like this, but the most important thing right now is just to make sure this area is spawn-proof so we don't have to deal with the ramifications of this being a spawnable area in the long term. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and then we're going to hop into Bounding Box Outline Reloaded, and I'm going to show you exactly what the bounding box of a witch hut looks like and how we can use that to our advantage. So this is a version of the survival guide world that I've regenerated in Minecraft 1.13.2 so that I can use the installation of Bounding Box Outline Reloaded that I have. I'm not certain if the mod is available for 1.14 yet, but regardless of that, this is the same world, it's the same witch hut in the same position. Doesn't have the perimeter and stuff built around it, of course, because this is just a recreation of the world, but it's the same witch hut, you get the general idea. And as you can see, around the outside of this witch hut, we have a bounding box which fits the dimensions of the witch hut for the most part. You can see that it ends where this roof line ends and where the front porch ends on this side. It's about as wide as the roof is as well, but we do have a couple of blocks to work with at the top here. And the reason for this really is that I think witch huts actually spawn in a certain range of this bounding box. So in theory, they can generate with stilts that are a little taller. So when a witch hut bounding box generates, it kind of potentially positions the witch hut anywhere within kind of 2 blocks worth of wiggle room. And of course, the bounding box stops at sea level, meaning that below the water, we aren't going to get any witch spawns. Naturally, that wouldn't occur anyway because mobs don't like to spawn in water with the exception of aquatic mobs and drowned. But in terms of the witches, they're only going to be spawning at sea level or above. So that's going to give us a few blocks to work with in here. And in fact, you'll find that there is the potential for witches to spawn anywhere within this box. Now, we can arrange that optimally to figure out how many spawning platforms we can give the witches. We're typically going to be working with 3 separate platforms, all of which will be able to pack spawn a large number of witches that will then drop through into a collection mechanism. So as far as a collection mechanism goes for the witches, or at least a kill mechanism leading into a collection mechanism, you can't really use some of the tricks that you would use elsewhere for hostile mob farms. You cannot, for example, drop witches through lava, because then they will drink fire resistance potions and they'll be fine. Witches will naturally kind of generate resistances where they can to that kind of stuff, and you can even use that on occasion to farm fire resistance potions from witches, but that's not something we need to worry about today. Instead, what we're going to do is drop the witches 23 blocks or more, which should result in them dying of fall damage, probably the most reliable way of killing a witch. To allow for easy collection, we're either going to have a pad of hoppers underneath that they're falling onto, or potentially a solid floor with a hopper minecart collection system running underneath it, and that's going to allow us to channel all of the drops into a simple storage mechanism like the ones we've built at our other mob farms or item sorters. But as far as the spawnable area for witches goes, this is what we're working with. So in terms of where you want to build the spawning floors for these farms, it seems likely that the best places to do that are going to be maybe down here, so that you will have 2 blocks of space that guarantees a witch will be able to spawn in there, and then 2 blocks up from that, because witches will need a 2-block high space in order to spawn, despite the fact that their hat, I think, actually glitches into the ceiling. It's not part of their hitbox itself. Let me just quickly check that. But then a witch spawns in here. It's pretty likely that it's going to be a 2-block high mob to begin with. So you'll need 2 blocks high of space, and then you'll need another 2 blocks above that. So our last spawning floor is going to be here. And I think, I may be wrong about this, but I think if you just have 1 block here that is part of the spawning space of a witch hut, you will still be able to get witches spawning in this area. I think that is the case. Obviously, we would have to do a little bit of testing of that, but I'm pretty certain that most witch farms employ a 3-floor pattern like this, so you should be able to spawn witches either here, or if we lower this block a little bit further down and have the witches' heads spawning within the boundary of the witch hut hitbox, we should be able to get witches spawning one way or the other. And there we go. Having placed a platform at sea level, 2 blocks up from there, and 2 further blocks up from there, we are getting natural witch spawns on each of these platforms. You can do this in creative mode in this case, in this test world, by running a quick command to kill everything that is not a player. And if we do that, and we're a decent distance away from the farm, eventually you should start to see, yep, there we go, a couple of witches pack spawning on top of there. The reason I'm having to kill everything else in the world is that, once again, we do have a lot of caves in the sea area below us, so that is potentially going to cause a little bit of a problem with natural mob spawning here and there. Likewise, I haven't cleared out the rest of the terrain on the surface, so we're getting stuff like slimes and creepers spawning over there in that swamp biome. We potentially get some other stuff spawning over there if it was within range. If we kill everything again, let's see if, yep, we got witch spawns on that bottom platform. Oh, I've got a couple there, actually. That's pretty good. And the middle platform does show some action as well, while, of course, you know, it's nighttime and we don't have any sunlight happening. We should start to see witch spawns on that middle platform there as well. There's one now, there we go. But as you can see, the amount of entities it's killing each time I run this command, obviously that's fish and stuff in the surrounding ocean as well, but there must be tons of mobs spawning below us. In fact, while we're in this creative test world, let's quickly go into spectator mode, and I will show you the sheer number of caves that we have to deal with down here, because as you can see, there are areas like this. This ravine should be okay because it's mostly lava, but for that 128 block radius that we marked out using the Circle of Netherrack, we are, in theory, going to have to light up as many of those caves as possible. In fact, a lot of these do seem to be underwater caves, which is helpful because the only things they could spawn down there really would be drowned, and we could potentially light those up sparingly so that that wouldn't be much of a problem. But yeah, as you can see here, we got some creepers spawning. We would have a lot of other stuff spawning down here as well, but I don't think mobs will typically spawn while I'm in spectator mode and while I'm within a certain proximity to that area. So yeah, that's the stuff we have to deal with, is all of those caves and things down there, which is why you will typically find people, if they have the time and the resources, clearing out this entire perimeter of any terrain that it's possible to have. They'll get rid of the landscape, they'll get rid of the water, they'll get rid of basically anything that could potentially be a spawnable space for mobs, right the way down to bedrock. And bedrock will not spawn anything on it, so that's typically the way a lot of people tend to deal with these farms if they have an abundance of time on their hands. Remember that for this witch farm to work during the day, we also have to make this a completely dark space on the inside of the farm. So that's going to involve making a larger platform over the top to block skylight, and making sure there are no lights around the farm that might be lighting up the areas where the witches can spawn. But with a relatively high AFK spot, we should be able to eliminate some of the lower caves while still allowing enough space for the witches to not instantly despawn when they drop down into the kill mechanism. But if you consider that down here we have a platform at Y63, which is sea level, it needs to go 23 blocks below that. So we are probably going to be around Y equals 40, and we will need to light up caves around that area and above to make sure that there isn't any spawnable space for other hostile mobs. It's going to be quite the task. So, back here in the Minecraft Survival Guide world, I'm going to outline the bounding box of this witch hut using wool, so that we know what area we're working with, and so that I can take down the witch hut itself in order to prepare it for other stuff. We are going to need to open out an area below here. We're going to need to make sure it is not filled with water, and then we're going to create a shaft for all of the witches to drop down into, die of full damage, and for us to collect their drops. So the first thing to do really is to basically outline the witch hut in its entirety, starting there, and I think it will need to come out one more block than that if we're going to do the outline rather than the inside of the bounding box. We want to make sure that we are framing it pretty accurately here. Remember that the bounding box extends all the way to the outside of this roof, and it also goes 2 blocks above the roof there. But the top floor of the witch farm is going to be around here. So realistically, we want the topmost part of our witch farm to have a ceiling at about this height here. So that's what we're aiming for when we outline this. By the way, while we're here, one other important aspect of this, which was pointed out to me in the last video by a user named Rotating Atom, so thank you for that comment, pointed out that if we check the biome indicator over here on the F3 screen, we need to make sure that each block of this witch hut is still technically in a swamp biome, because there is a chance with it spawning so close to the edge of this ocean biome that some of the blocks in the area of this witch hut could technically count as ocean. And I think we've actually got lucky here. I don't think we get into the ocean blocks until we are past the bounding box of the witch hut itself. But any blocks which are technically outside of the swamp biome and go back into the ocean biome have a chance to spawn normal mobs and may not spawn witches at all. So that's kind of something we want to avoid here. Luckily, I think we're going to be able to get away with it with this witch hut, but you never know. It is worth checking, especially if your witch hut is on the boundary of this. It looks like a blessing with the sheer amount of terrain you don't have to remove for a perimeter, but it can potentially be a problem. So watch out for that if you are trying this for yourself. And while we're on the subject of people in the comments mentioning some useful stuff about this farm, people did point out that it's not really strictly necessary to create 128 block circle around here, because the spawning radius of mobs, the radius at which mobs will despawn, that 128 block limit, counts in a sphere around the player, not just in a circle. So the vertical height can be taken into account as well. And if we pick an AFK spot that is far above this witch farm, we may not encounter as many mob spawns as we normally might. Therefore, with about a limited amount of lighting up, removal of some high spots that might cause some issues for stuff like that, it isn't really strictly necessary to clear out the entire area around here, and we could still avoid some of the stuff that is spawning down in caves, as long as we make sure that we are 128 blocks maximum distance away from the very bottom of the farm where the killing platform is going to be, where the witches are going to be dying. The thing is, if mobs get outside of that 128 block radius, they will despawn even if they are falling to their deaths. It's something I've tested in creative a couple of times just to make sure this information is accurate, but I got a couple of creeper spawn eggs in my creative test world. I dropped them from 128 blocks above the ground, and if I was too far away, they never hit the ground. They just despawn. And we don't want that to happen to our witches, because we want this witch farm to be productive and not just be killing air blocks. So effectively, we do still need to make sure that some of the radius around here is going to be spawn-proofed, simply because the witches are going to be dying potentially at y equals 40, and there are probably going to be some caves in the vicinity that might be lit up. However, once again, the radius around the player around which mobs will spawn will mean that that is a smaller area than it at first appears. So hopefully we should get lucky, and this farm should be pretty productive from the get-go. So now we have a wool frame around our witch hut. The next task is going to be to extend this frame downwards to make sure that an area around here is completely waterproof, to dry out the inside, and then to dig down so that we can create a killing floor where all of our witches are going to be falling to their deaths. And I'm going to do that off camera, because you've seen me dry out stuff before. Go and check out the episode about draining an ocean monument if you want to know how to do stuff like that. It's all going to be fairly straightforward, and I'll see you guys on the other side. Hey folks, welcome back. So I am very glad that I did a little bit of research off camera and discovered that witches have slightly more health than other mobs. As I was digging this hole, I thought I could probably just leave it at Y40, because that's going to be roughly 23 blocks below sea level at Y63, and that is where we would build the floor for our kind of killing chamber and allow the witches to die from full damage. However, witches actually have 13 hearts of health or 26 hit points, where other mobs like zombies and skeletons and so forth might only have 20. So you actually need a slightly higher drop from which to kill witches, and they will die at a minimum of 30 blocks full height. So we are down here now at Y31, and we're going to be building the killing floor here at 31.5 blocks up. We're going to be building it as a set of slabs up here, taking no chances, really. But what we have here is a very similar setup to what you'll find in the squid farm, which we covered previously in the season. We've just got a bunch of hopper minecarts that are going to be collecting any items that end up dropping onto this floor of red nether brick slabs as a result of the witches dying on them. And this whole area is going to be covered over. We're going to be able to switch the collection mechanism on and off, just in case, for whatever reason, if we leave the chunks, the minecarts get stuck or anything like that. They're always going to return to a set of powered rails over here that we can flick on and off with a simple redstone current leading to this block here, for example. So let me quickly come back in here and place a redstone block there, and all of the minecarts go away at once, and then they all return at once. All we have to do is take out the power source, and they all return to dock here, where we have 2 hoppers taking the items out into whatever the storage system is going to be that we set up here. But I haven't got that far yet, because I've mostly been working on making sure that the dimensions of this farm are as they should be. If you ever need to calculate how much full damage something needs to take before it dies, by the way, there's a fairly simple rule of thumb you can follow. Find out how much health it has by going to the Minecraft wiki, for example, if your information is going to be there for all of your hostile mobs and that kind of thing. And if you consider that, for example, as a player, if you fall from a 3-block height, you don't take any fall damage. Whereas if you fall from a 4-block height, you do start to take full damage, although it's incredibly minimal, and I think it just kind of gives you that trip sound and maybe does half a heart of damage to the average player. So all you need to really do to calculate the amount of full damage something needs to take for it to die from falling is take the health and add 4. In this case, witches have 26 health because each heart of health is basically 2 points. So if you have 26 plus 4 equals 30. That's the 30 block drop that you'll need to put in your witch farm. By the way, it's pretty fun that we ended up digging down this far, because I actually found that ravine filled with lava that I showed you guys in the section where we were clipping through the floor using spectator mode in our test world. And we do need to light some sections of this up, because as you can see, there are creepers spawning, and various other mobs will be able to spawn along the shelf sides of the ravine here at roughly the height we can expect our witches to be dying on the floor down here. And remember, we want to stay within 128 blocks of this space here so that the witches will not despawn before they hit the ground. So we are probably going to need to light up some sections of this ravine, just so that when we end up AFKing here, we don't end up with hostile mobs spawning this low. Caves above that are also going to need to be taken into account, and also the problem of the drowned spawning in the ocean around here, because ocean biomes are drowned spawning spaces, and it's quite likely that we're going to encounter a few of those. Now, some people, as various solutions, have suggested things like conduits, which could fight the drowned and potentially create enough light to prevent drowned from spawning. I'm going to rule out conduits, the main reason being this is such a large space that I would need a lot of conduits to actually fill this area up, and conduits will only attack something that gets within 8 blocks of it. So that's a lot of hearts of the sea to find. I would need literally hundreds of conduits for them to kill the drowned instantly, and furthermore, it is better to stop the drowned from spawning at all than to wait for them to die, because conduits, while they do kill quickly, are not exactly an instant kill, and it would be much better for the drowned to not spawn at all. In the short term, I think the solution we will go with is to just light this area up as much as possible, because much like other mobs, drowned do need a low enough light level in order to spawn. It does need to be light level of 7 and below, which it only starts to get that way once skylight has disappeared around sort of 4 or 5 blocks below the surface of the ocean. Obviously at night that's going to be a different factor, but I think they do still need a little bit of headroom in terms of water above them before they will spawn. So we can take care of that a little way, and we can use some sea lanterns or even some sea pickles on the seabed down here to effectively limit the amount of spawnable space that the drowned can have. And I do have a lot of sea lanterns, so that's not going to be such a tall order after all. But without further ado, I'm going to remove the witch hut from here, and we're going to start setting up the spawning floors for the witch farm itself. So as always when making a farm like this, I have to acknowledge the efforts of the technical community that have led to folks like me being able to build a farm like this, because I could not dream up this farm design on my own. And this shifting floor mechanism in particular is one that I will attribute to ilmango, since that's the channel on which I saw this design first showcased. Actually, it was mentioned in one of his recent videos in which he explained that shifting floor designs didn't work in an earlier version of Minecraft 1.14, but thankfully since then that change has been reverted, making it much easier for me to follow this design and show it to you guys. So once again, I will recommend that you go and check out ilmango. He is an excellent technical Minecrafter whose name I'm sure you've heard mentioned in other Minecraft videos where people have made farms of this kind. I've already built one section of this shifting floor mechanism, and I'm mainly doing that so that I can copy it a couple more times and take you guys through it step by step. But what you're looking at here is a decent amount of materials, a lot of which involve redstone already, so chances are you will not be building a witch farm as your first main source of redstone. You should have gathered a fair amount of it already, because this will need several observers, pistons, a bunch of soul sand and andesite blocks. We also need a dropper and note blocks for this mechanism as well. So make sure you've got all of those components, and then what we're going to do is actually build a bunch of these sort of all at once if we can. I'll go through one first, and then we're going to kind of copy these multiple times until we have an entire floor comprised of these areas of shifting blocks. So we're going to put an observer facing into this block here. This block is going to be channeling a redstone current later. We're going to take this one out here, and thankfully that's not going to flood into here, although I've taken care to conceal all of the rails before we get along with that. Now, placing this piston facing this way is going to be a little bit more difficult. There we go. And then we need to copy an alternating block pattern here of a solid block, a completely solid block, and then soul sand. And the way this is going to work is that witches are going to end up on these soul sand blocks, which are slightly lower. Like if you look at the F3 debug screen right now, you'll see that the Y coordinate is shifting by a fraction of a block, basically the height of a carpet. And the great thing about soul sand is that mobs will still spawn on it. But once a witch has ended up falling into this kind of sub-block section of the soul sand, pushing another full block into the same space while not allowing them to move side to side, which is what these trapdoors are doing here, that basically pushes the witch into a sub-block space in this andesite block here and allows them to fall directly through. And the way we're going to have this set up, it's actually going to have multiple floors of this timed so that any witches that fall through from an upper floor immediately get shifted through the next couple of floors until they drop through into the killing mechanism down there. So once we reach the end here, we've got a last block of soul sand, and then we're going to place an observer facing into that soul sand, and that's going to trigger a mechanism over here. We want a piston right here with a note block on top of it. We want one block of any kind. It doesn't have to be nether brick, of course. It can be pretty much anything. And down here, we're going to have a dropper. The dropper is not going to have any content. It doesn't matter which way it's facing or anything like that. It just needs to activate, because that is what's going to be detected by this observer block. And another observer block on top of that is going to be detecting when that observer activates. That's going to send a single redstone pulse into this, which is going to activate the note block, and the piston there is going to be pushed at the same time. What that does is whenever we send a redstone pulse through that observer, pushing everything over here, it's going to update this circuit and push it back using the piston on this side. Let me give you a quick demonstration of that by removing this block in front of the observer. Like so, you'll see it shifted backwards and forwards very quickly, and that is enough time for the witches to end up shifting through this floor. Now, of course, we have to add trapdoors to each of these surfaces, and we're going to do that facing this way because that's the edge of the last block that's going to take up the witch farm bounding box, the kind of witch hut area inside of here. And we're going to place these two trapdoors on top of each other like so. I think one trapdoor might actually be enough, but I don't know for certain. So I've seen it used with two trapdoors in the example. So we're going to end up consuming quite a lot of wood for this, but hopefully it should all be worth it. We want to have these trapdoors going right the way to the end here because these observers are still inside the hitbox of the witch hut, and therefore they are still going to be potential spawning spaces. I'm pretty sure sure that the witches can still spawn on them even though they are redstone components, because they are also still full blocks. I'm going to get some sleep because it is getting quiet, but basically the next task is simply to tile this over. And the best thing about this mechanism, even though we are going to trigger it all at once, is that each of these mechanisms, each of these shifting floor segments is tileable, which means that it will not activate the redstone next to it if it is activated on its own. So generally speaking, as long as you build it in the right pattern, you shouldn't have too much to worry about in terms of the redstone here going wrong. And just like that, we have our full section of stuff completed. Once you've got into a rhythm with these things, it really doesn't take all that long to build them up. And this has not really taken me very long at all. Now, down there, you'll notice that that has gotten very dark. And that's a good thing that we've used slabs for the killing floor, because otherwise we would need to make sure that area stay lit up to prevent mob spawns. But for now, we should be able to worry about that a little bit later. The next stage is going to be to tile this up on the next level and then one level above that, and those are going to be our witch spawning spaces. And believe me, improbable though it might seem, witches will still spawn in areas even when there is a trapdoor inside the hitbox of a block like this. So you are going to see a bunch of stuff spawning in here. And I hope I will be able to demonstrate this by the end of this video, but trust me, this is going to work out great. Well, a quick trip to the end to repair my tools, a quick trip to the nether to get more soul sand, and a fair amount of redstone set up later. We have ourselves what should hopefully be a working witch farm, as long as I can fill in the sides and the top with something that will darken the inside of it, make sure no light gets in. I think this should all be working famously at this point. And because I know we're already running a little bit long on this episode, I'm going to go into the redstone side of things tomorrow, because we are going to be revisiting this farm a little more, just to kind of do a little bit of tidying up around here, and maybe do a little bit of decoration, maybe do a little bit of lighting up of the surrounding area, and choosing our AFK spot. And I'll go into the redstone then, because for those of you who haven't seen a hopper clock before, haven't watched the other episodes of this series where I've used one, this might be a little bit confusing to you. But what we have here is a hopper clock running on a fairly short timer, using 16 items for this, and it activates this row of redstone, which updates the observers, causing them to push the sliding floor once. Then it goes down this wire here to a repeater, which is delaying the signal for the next floor to activate, and then down this side as well, delaying the signal one more time for that row of observers to activate. And hopefully these floors should be in sync. We can adjust the timings a little bit if we need to, and that should lead to any witches that spawn on the top being shuffled through to the bottom until they fall down into the rest of the farm and get killed on that drop that we have down there. It does tend to strobe the lighting a little bit in there, so apologies for that, but hopefully that shouldn't be a problem for the operation of the farm itself. One last thing I really want to do before we finally lay this episode to rest is get this whole thing covered up and do a test run, just to make sure that nothing awful has gone wrong, to make sure that we don't need to do any more tweaks to the mechanism itself, because I don't want to give you guys a half-finished tutorial. So I'm going to do a very quick test to see if this works, and then we're going to wrap up for today. Well, folks, I am on top of the world right now. Quite literally, actually. I'm probably at about, I'm about Y158. I reckon I could probably top out at about Y160 for AFKing at this farm successfully. And as you may be able to hear from the rustling of pistons in the background, I have the farm running, and it is running right here, aside from obviously all of the hostile mobs around here, which I will have to slab the bits of the mechanism that are sticking out like this, or potentially light them up once the whole thing is enclosed. What we have here is a working witch farm, and occasionally the witches will pack spawn in here, so hopefully we'll be able to catch one or two instances where that happens. But I did have to add another repeater into the shifting floor. Each of the floors is now running, the subsequent floors at least, is running on about a 7-tick delay. And watch what happens to this witch when it... Yep, okay, I think there's a couple of them that don't quite shift right. Okay, we got a big... yep, there we go, a big spawn of witches, and they all ended up dropping down here. And as you can see, this thing has been... Well, it's not been collecting quite yet, because I haven't got the collection mechanism running, and that is something we're going to have to set up in the next episode, to sort through all of these items, sort through the ones which are important to us. But I have to say, even without having to worry about lighting up all of the caves around here and stuff like that, this farm has actually been doing pretty well by itself. And that is thanks to the fact that I'm up so high, not spawning in caves in the local area as much, not allowing too much other stuff to spawn. Once we have finished off lighting all of the surrounding area to make sure that no drowned can spawn, make sure that nothing will spawn on the mechanism, and make sure that nothing will spawn in caves in the nearby area, this farm is going to be an absolute beast with just one witch hut. And I'm so happy that this farm has come together in the way that it has. Right now I'm going to take all of this pillar and stuff down because, yeah, despite the farm running pretty well, I haven't closed in the sides yet, so there's no real point in me AFKing up here during the day, and there's no way for me to skip the night other than cheating, which I don't really want to do. So I think this has been a success, and I hope you have had a good look at the innards of this witch farm, because we are going to transform it into something a little bit prettier in the episodes to come, along with figuring out a sorting system and making sure we have all of the caves around here and the water around here lit up to optimize how well this farm is going to perform. But for today, I think we have done enough. I think we have ourselves a working witch farm. This was the first witch farm I've ever built, guys. So I hope you guys enjoyed it and you're looking forward to using it in your own worlds. Thank you so much for watching this episode of the Minecraft Survival Guide. My name has been Pixlriffs. Don't forget to leave a like on this episode if you enjoyed it. Subscribe if you want to see more, and I'll see you guys soon. Take care. Bye for now.